I will, yeah. Okay, welcome back everyone. Hope lunch was good. Hope you've had a chance to cool down a bit and have a bit of a refresh. Hi to everyone joining us on YouTube. We've had some good feedback already, so thanks so much for that. Really good to hear from people on the outside how it's going. So first of our keynote speakers this afternoon is Duncan Craig from We Are Survivors. Duncan's whole motto is No Survivor Left Behind, which is really valuable because, as we know, survivors come from, all genders, all ages, everything. So I'm going to hand you over to Duncan without further ado so he can talk about the brilliant work that he and his team do.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. When you were, Vicky, when you were waving at YouTube people, where are you waving? Oh. I've just been thinking, what the fuck is she doing? Okay. Thought she was just having a breakdown and we were slowly just watching that. It was really interesting you said other people on the outside, because I'm going to talk about the people on the inside. So thanks to Lucy and Vicky and the Survivors Trust team for inviting me here today to talk about survivors who are prisoners. I'm doing a workshop with my colleague Alison, who's my Criminal Justice Services Director. Later we're just going to have a discussion. So I'm going to keep a lot of the the talk about how you work with survivors who are prisoners to probably that, although I'm dead happy to take some questions. But first of all, let me just tell you a little bit about We Are Survivors, which many of you probably will know as what used to be Survivors Manchester.
I've worked at We Are Survivors for 9 years. 7 years.
Started here last October, so 6 months. Is it? 4 months? 5 months?
Just over 3 months. For about a month. 2.5 years.
4 months now.
Long by. I think it's around a year. The favorite thing about working here is the community feel. I just think the chance to help people who have suffered devastating trauma, I felt like I wanted to do more than what I was doing, and this job has given me the opportunity to do that.
I always say I work with really, really strong, emotionally intelligent people, and I get to meet people with a lot of strength, and knowing that I can give them that strength and also borrow it from them, just being in this environment with them is really, really special. So, welcome to the new community event space here at We Are Survivors. I'd love to just give you a quick tour. So, it's a very casual environment. We run a wide variety of events here. But honestly, most of the time, it's just a nice place for a brew, a chat, and a check-in with other men like yourself.
This is the area where we do the more creative activities. We run an online and an in-person art room, and we do a writing session. It's just a space to express yourself and for other survivors to connect with other survivors.
So the Builder's Yard is a space where we get together each week and we build Lego together. This is some of the things we've been building recently. And we also, every Tuesday, run my favourite event, which is the yoga, which is a fantastic free event and a great space for mindfulness and exercise.
This is where we run the drop-in, really casual, people pop in, they pop out, nice space to have a chat, connect with other people like yourself.
We also run here a bi-weekly series of safe rooms, which are much more trauma focused. They're a place for people to express as much as they are comfortable to in an environment that is confidential, surrounded by other survivors, and it is always facilitated by survivors like myself. It's a really beautiful and empowering environment, and we would recommend it to anyone who is waiting for or wants to sort of assist in their own personal journey.
For anybody wanting to reach out for support at We Are Survivors, I'd say do it.
It can obviously be very scary.
It's really nerve-wracking. I used to be a client myself, a client for quite a few years here. It's definitely life-changing, hearing them share their stories. There's a privilege, to be honest.
It's very, very casual. It's much more like a family get-together than it is I think it's a very survivor-focused space initially.
You can talk at your pace, and we're just here for you.
We're here to support, and we can support your every need.
And they'll walk with you side by side. You're not alone.
And if they're willing to open up and start sort of stepping outside their comfort zone and asking questions about themselves, then it can transition as slowly or as quickly into a more focused space from which they can heal.
So welcome to our therapy space.
This is where we have all the therapy sessions and ISPA sessions for our clients to come and sit comfortably in a private space.
There's 5 therapy rooms and a waiting area as well for clients. Each room, as you can see, is kind of personalised. I feel like people feel like they make their own sort of space within the rooms, which is really nice.
And there's a lot of stuff that you can look around on the walls to show our achievements and just a little bit of a timeline of We Are Survivors.
Nerve-wracking as it is, once you've made that first step, it does get easier and your life can get better because of it.
My message to the world is
Live and let live.
I think it's important for people to do what they feel is right for them, and I would encourage anybody who has that to chase it and go after it.
try as hard as you can and you'll succeed. When you replace I with we, even illness becomes wellness.
That's just a cool little film that was made by one of the team. So you see probably about a quarter of my rabble, and they are a rabble, and they do amazing work. And I've got a few of them here. George is here, so he was on the video, so I think he's signing autographs or something later. I don't know, something's going on. Right, I just need to work out. Oh, hello. I just need to work out which button I'm pressing. We Are Survivors' vision is about ensuring no male survivors left behind. So as an organisation, we work with boys and men affected by sexual abuse, rape and sexual exploitation. But I would argue that our vision is about no survivor left behind. So we stand really strongly and in support of tackling violence against women and girls. And I'm very proud of my record, my personal record, but also my organisation's record on that. And we will continue to stand tall and stand with women's and women's organisations. I get a little bit tired. I've been around a bit too long now. This is my 18th year in this sector, 16 years nearly with the organisation, and I get a little bit tired of hearing the same old divisive bullshit. The stuff that tends to pit us against each other rather than sharing spaces together. Just because I'm standing here talking about men and boys doesn't mean I'm ignoring women and girls. And equally, if any women are going to be standing up here talking about women and girls, I'm quite happy to not hear anybody say, yeah, but what about men? It's tired, it's boring, and please could we stop it? And I know it's not, I hope it's not any of you in the room. I'm sure it's not. But I think we have to stand up. And we have to start being really clear about what we're talking about. I'm talking about 1 in 6 men. So when we look from academia in what we used to call Western countries, that's not okay. We talk about high income countries now. In high income countries, we look at 1 in 6 males will experience some form of, in the broadest sense of the term, unwanted sexual experiences. in their lifetime. I'm interested in that 1 in 6. I'm also interested in the 1 in 4 females with using the same informatics. I'm interested in making sure that we are looking at all of those people. But for that 1 in 6, when you start leaning into the prison population, suddenly it begins to shrink. And actually what we find is disproportionately there's more people in prison. We heard in one of the workshops earlier around trauma and ACEs. And so I want to kind of just prod that a little bit and tell you a little bit about our journey. We started working in prisons, you'll see, just before Operation U-Tree. So Operation U-Tree was really the big catalyst for us. And what we found, and despite the fact I sound proper posh, I'm from Manchester, what we found in Manchester, round about the start of the Savile, not even the Savile Inquiry, but when the documentary came out, what we found, and people forget about this, is that there was quite a lot of adult male survivors of sexual abuse from Savile, from that whole cohort, who interestingly were like located in Manchester. And I always was a bit scratching my head like, well, what's that about? And there was a theory that that's to do with because a Top of the Pops was filmed in Manchester in its very, very early days. And there was a whole question of like, what's kind of going on there? And some of these men were, as now adults, were beginning to talk about, oh, have you seen that thing on telly? And they were talking about it on the wings of prisons with very little support. So we started getting phone calls and having conversations with mental health trusts, with prison governors, with prison staff, probation, who was saying, is there any chance you could go and just have a conversation? So we started having those conversations. And I remember having a chat with a particular commissioner who's still around, so I'm not naming names. And they said to me, you know that men won't come and talk to you in prison about being a survivor? And I was like, yeah, they will. No, they won't. You see, what survivors want, and I just said, hold on a second. First of all, you're talking to one. Secondly, we're not this homogenous group of people. We have many different faces and many different needs. So please don't tell me what survivors want. This individual, this commissioner, was not a survivor theirself as well. I'm being very careful not even to gender that commissioner, so you have no idea who I'm talking about. I had a theory though, the Field of Dreams theory, build it and they will come. I know that our sector is built on that theory. The majority of organisations that set up to deal with survivors were built by women who had nowhere else to go. Survivors built this sector, survivors will continue to build this sector. And it's really important that we never forget that. So when commissioners and politicians and people are telling you, oh no, survivors won't like that, because what we know from research, there's a word that begins with P and ends with "is off." I would recommend you using it a little bit more than you do, because this sector knows what survivors want, because we listen to survivors. So I started listening to survivors, the survivors that were not being listened to. And what that meant was, as a survivor going into a prison and talking to prisoners and talking to other men, it meant that, which will be no surprise to you, people started joining together. People started going, oh, me too, before me too. And so what that meant was people began to start thinking more compassionately about themselves and about each other. And unsurprisingly, what that meant is people's behaviour got a bit more pro-social and a little bit less antisocial. And then governors and prison officers began to notice this, and probation officers began to notice this, and would say things like, you know, when you go in that room with those prisoners and like, what the fuck do you do? Because they come out and they're just like really well behaved. And I just said, I just listen to him and just have a conversation. For any of us survivors in the room that's ever sat with other survivors and just chatted and then gone, oh God, yeah, right, see you next week or whatever, and just feel much better. That's it. There's no great surprise here. It's not some massive big magic potion. It was just listening to people who we know when we think about adverse childhood experiences. The prison population has more people in it with adverse childhood experiences than any other population. So work continues, and more people began to ask us, like, can we do this and can we do that? And I just kept saying, yeah. My board kept saying, will you stop saying yeah? And I kept going, no. Did you get, like, they told me not to say yes, so I said no. And then just about the first few months of the global pandemic, one of our commissioners, Tracy at NHS England, said, I know we've asked you to do those 2 prisons because you've been doing that one so good. I don't suppose you could do all 15 prisons in the Northwest, could you? And I said, Ali, so my Criminal Justice Services Director, Alison, can we just sort out 15 prisons across the Northwest in the global pandemic, please, when we're all in PPE and no one's allowed to be unlocked? And she went, yeah, and then moaned for the rest of her life that I made her do it. I'll get absolutely smashed for that later. When no one's looking, she'll give me a dig. But that's what we did. We joined together. We took some bits of our work previously. So back in 2013, we'd done a piece of work on the Belief in Change programme. Belief in Change programme was at HMP Risley. It was an interesting programme because it was faith-based. It was led by chaplaincy. And what they decided to do was to look at how do you bring people together to begin to teach compassion, to teach life skills. And in one of the life skills groups, which was peer-led, I'd been doing a BBC breakfast or something like that. So I'd been on telly talking about, I think, a new report that had come out. And 2 of the lads had seen me on telly, went back into their peer support group and said, and there's about 15 lads in that group, and said, oh my God, just saw this guy on telly from Manchester just talking about like what happened to him, and like, I think it happened to me as well. And 14 people said me too. And the prison officer who was in the room said it was like watching dominoes just go down. Everybody fell. And so they contacted us and said, can you do something? I was like, yeah. We went in, set up a peer support group, which we've been doing outside for ages, and tried to sort of measure. You know how commissioners like numbers, and so we decided to do something. And so one of the things that we've always stuck with is try to measure in a numerical way trauma. And I know people get really upset about this and, you know, well, you can't just measure it in numbers. Of course you can't. I'm not saying it's the only way, but I needed something. So we used the IESR, the Impact of Event Scale. It was one that I'd been using as I was at EMDR. I'm a qualified psychotherapist, and I was using it in EMDR because that's what most people use. And I just thought it was really interesting. Self-reported questionnaire that in some way gave somebody the ability to answer a whole load of questions and go, what would my trauma score be? What does that mean in a medical sense? And people began to get excited because what we were showing was the disproportionate amount of men in prison in HMP Risley who were reporting really high levels of trauma before we were talking about ACEs in this country, by the way. I know ACEs have been talked about in the States for donkey's years, but before we started talking about ACEs, and so we started seeing this really interesting trend. That carried on, and we started asking people, okay, so I've got all these scores and these numbers, but what do you think? What has been the impact of you being here, being in this group? And we started hearing people's words. And I will never defend the actions of any of my clients in prison. Never. I've worked with people who have done and committed some of the most heinous crimes known to us. But I will listen, and I will start trying to make sense of the world, exactly like I did as a survivor. We will never excuse what our clients have done, but it begins to help us understand why, the reason, not the excuse, the reason for somebody's behaviour, etc., etc. And one of the things that I heard one of my clients say, which has always stuck with me and I use it so often. I was working with an individual who the crime that he committed had resulted in a number of people losing their life. A terrible, terrible crime, and I would argue, been failed by the system. The system had failed him repeatedly, from childhood right through to adulthood. And it felt like he was stuck in something. Everything felt quite cyclical. That recidivism was really high, of whenever he got the opportunity, even just to go to a lower category prison, something happened and he ended up being returned. We were chatting once and he said, do you know what I love about talking to you? And I said, what? And he went, it's like talking to a bird, but you're a bloke. I did challenge him on the use of the word bird, by the way. But what is that saying? What does that say? I think what he's saying is, my understanding of masculinity and maleness is that we don't show vulnerability and we don't show compassion and we don't show kindness, and you've shown all these things to me, and so my mind's not computing. I think what I started doing, completely accidentally, and I had no idea I was doing this, was modelling something. And I think that's what we've been doing in prisons, and I think that's why it's become so successful. In 2015, we did another piece of work where we actually were able to show the differences. So the blue lines, I think, on that one it looks like it's grey, but the darker coloured lines, they show the IESR score at the beginning, and the orange ones show it at the end. We can see significant changes in trauma symptoms. Having all of that knowledge and leaning into Alison's knowledge and other people's knowledge, we decided to go and find out whether we can make this whole wonderful system work, and now a model work in all 15 prisons across the Northwest during a global pandemic when the majority of us were in PPE, full PPE. The first 3 weeks of my work in prison during the pandemic, so the 23rd of March, the Prime Minister locked us all down. I was in full PPE, wandering around the prisons, hearing this, "Whoa, you look right, dickhead!" And I thought, yeah, I did actually. It doesn't suit me, PPE. But that's what we did. We did that because it felt really important to not stop our services. So Outspoken was born. Why is it called Outspoken? Well, because we want people to be outspoken. We're also hoping at some point they'll be out of prison. The idea is that in some way we begin to help people deal with their trauma in every single way that you do it in the community or in other areas, to begin to allow people to get a real sense of self, allow them to be the people that they really should have been, allow them to, and as many of us know, allow survivors to survive and thrive and just be brilliant individuals. Tiborn Anderson, who is an academic, Professor Emeritus I think he is now, he said that shame and guilt have become the hallmark of the victim. And it really resonates with me that, as a survivor, it resonates with me from, if guilt is the thing I did bad and shame is the thing I am bad, I carried those so often in my life. And then when I first stepped into prison, I noticed so many people carrying the same, maybe I would argue heavier shame and guilt. And so we decided to kind of tackle it and say, no. Okay, so you have done some terrible things. Let's put that down to one side for a second, because probation's dealing with that and psychology's dealing with that. And let's look at what happened to you. Not what have you done, not what you did, not how you got here. Because for me, I think that just perpetuates that shame and guilt. I'm interested in, where are you? What happened to you? And so we began to talk about it. Our service has always been underpinned by Judith Herman's model of trauma and recovery in a really simple sense. Stabilisation, processing, integration. That journey is definitely not linear, but I've got no idea how to draw it not linear. So let's just pretend that that's not linear, because it jumps back and forth. But there's something really important about that process. And so I started dealing with people. I started holding space for people. I started leaning into going out on the wings, not just sat in my clinic room, because going out on the wings is really scary. And then I realised it wasn't scary. I just realised it was just a load of men, and then in the female state, a load of women who are all terrified. They're all absolutely petrified of being there, but nobody wants to admit it. And so I realised, well, if they're scared and I'm scared, well, it'll be all right. And I started meeting some of the most inspiring individuals who genuinely wanted to create change, but nobody was giving them a chance. And so Seb came along, and Seb had been sexually abused majority of his life, and then at age 18 a particular situation when he was dealing drugs resulted in the loss of someone's life. Seb didn't even know that he'd killed his victim until he was watching the news and saw the person's picture come up. The shame and guilt that he carried about that index offence was massive. It was like it was overshadowing everything else. And so we got talking. And we got talking not because some professional referred him in, because they didn't. I was walking across the yard one afternoon, and I just get shouted at, "Oh, boss, come here. And I go, what? Are you the abuse guy? Genuinely, that's what we got called. And I went, yeah, I think so. What? My mate comes to speak to you, and he said I should speak to you. I was like, oh, okay then. You free now? Yeah, okay. I said, come on then. And we just went and sat down. We just had 5 minutes. Just said to me, some shit happened when I was a kid. Never dealt with it. Think maybe it's time for me to deal with it. I was like, okay. And that was that. And we just started chatting. Did my assessment. He did his score. His first score showed me how not traumatised he was. And then about 5 sessions in, we did it again. And he told me the truth. It's why I get frustrated with some of our NHS way of doing things. I love the NHS, but I get frustrated that we take the first and last. I think we should be doing the worst and best. I think that will give us a better indication. But Seb started talking, started opening up. He couldn't say abuse, he couldn't say rape, he couldn't say those words. He just used to say that thing. And that was fine. We just went with that thing. We just went with whatever language it was useful for him. And using my Judith Herman's model, stabilisation, processing, integration. I began to conceptualise how I'm going to work with Seb. The first few weeks, we just chatted about life. He asked me some questions. He asked me about my wedding ring. How's your wife? Well, actually, it's not a wife. It's a husband. Oh, right, how's your husband? Like, when people start talking about toxic masculinity, I get it. I think it's a wrong conversation. I think what we should really be talking about is toxic gender norms. That's the proper conversation. Because if we unpacked all of that, we'd really start understanding who we are and what are we still subscribing to. Because I was subscribing to this idea that Seb will be massively homophobic, etc., etc. Wasn't. Genuinely couldn't give a shit. Do you know what he cared about? Was he going to be there next week? Was he going to be able to get his session? Would I be able to go and unlock his door and get him out? Because what if it's a training thing and I'm on lockdown? Yeah, don't worry about it, I'll come and get you. What Seb then began to do was go round the wing and say to people, "You're mental, you need to go and speak to Dunk." And slowly but surely, the organisation and the service grew until we get to the point where in just 23-24 we've seen over 1,700 prisoners. The majority of the prisoners are aged, the men are aged between 30 and 39. We also work within the female estate. We work with our sister organisation at Greater Manchester Rape Crisis for that. We've been asked to start thinking more and more about the, let's just call it the secure estate. How do we begin to talk about individuals and support individuals? When I looked at the data when I was putting some of these slides together, and I saw that 13,190 engagements, contacts and activities. Remember, in prison, it's all face to face. You can't ring someone. Well, I mean, you can, but you're not supposed to, because nobody has phones in prison. Some of the cells now have their own phone, but 99% of those contacts are face to face. That's my amazing outspoken team, Ali's staff, just going out on the wing and just chatting. It's phenomenal. It literally fills my heart with joy. 44% of prisoners that we worked with in 23-24 who had effectively an evidenced IAP score reliably recovered. That's phenomenal. That's more than your local IAP service. It's better than your local IAP service in the community. Who said prisoners won't come and talk? Looks like they're talking. And not only does it look like they're talking, it looks like it's actually having an impact. 74% showed a reliable improvement at the end of treatment. Vastly better than your local IAP service delivered by your GP, etc., etc. I'm really proud of that, and I know people get really pissy about it, but couldn't give a shit, honestly, because the team works so hard to deliver that. 94% of individuals at assessment met the same, what's called caseness, the same level, an IAPT level in the community at like step 3, step 4. So we're talking about people with really significant need, with long and enduring mental health issues, trauma, etc., etc. We've had to develop our pathway. We've had to make sure that we're doing things safely and in the right way. We've had to help create culture change, because what you can't do is you can't just rock up to a prison and be like, "I do you want to do some therapy?" Because there's a culture within prisons of things happening behind closed doors. Does that sound familiar to my fellow survivors in the room? And what we have to do is we have to be transparent. And we have to really talk to people. So much of the work, about the first, 3 months before going in, every time we go to it, opened up a new prison, for about 3 months prior to us actually starting therapy, we just go in and talk to staff and really begin to change that culture and get word out there so people really understand what it is that we're doing. I understand that actually prisoners do want to be spoken to, they do want to heal, they do want to reclaim their lives, they do want to change. Contrary to popular belief, particularly over the last week or so with the early release scheme, where the press would want you to believe there is just this crazy thing happening. All we've done is we've just let a few people out 10% earlier than they would have done anyway. I think we just all need to calm down a little bit. However, I fully understand that for many survivors, it's been really frightening. I think that's a communications problem, quite frankly. I don't think we did very well on this communication. I'm fully aware TST staff are going to start waving at me to get off, but they'll have to wait. Yeah. You'll be all right. You'll be fine. We've done some teaching. We've taught people how to engage. We deliver a handbook to all of the staff in the prisons to really make sure that everybody understands how we're working with people. Are these slides going out? Yeah. So this slide here was actually from a prison officer. So here's the thing, I'm sure some of you have experienced this as well. The moment that you start talking in a brand new space, staff go, can I have a word with you? And they begin to make disclosures. How many times have you been to deliver a training course or a conference and someone tugs you coat at this side, oh, can I just speak to you? Because what we've done is we've created a space for people to talk. So you have to think about that too. So the last word I'm going to give to one of the other survivors, one of the people who ended up then becoming part of our expert advisory panel, the groups of individuals that tell me whether I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing because they've used our services. The last line, I'm out to survive, is so powerful. Something about I'm now being out to survive, I'm being out as a survivor, and when I get out, I'm going to survive. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry it took some of your time. They'll find it, they'll give it you back.
We knew he would, we absolutely knew it. Thanks Duncan. And you were quite restrained, to be fair, weren't you? Well done. Thank you very much. Really powerful stuff, thanks so much.
How I didn't carry on for ages. Be grateful.
He's saving it for his workshop later, aren't you? Right, thank you. I'm going to introduce Dr. Ellie Hansen now. So Ellie's a clinical psychologist. She's doing loads of really important work into the prevention of sexual abuse and reducing its impact as well. Ellie does loads of work with us at TST, which we're really grateful for. So she's going to tell us a bit more about what she does. Really important stuff. Thank you.
It's such a privilege to be here. Tough act to follow, but I will try my best. And today I'm going to talk about something a bit different, which is when buying sex becomes normal, which I'm going to argue is overall corporate profit but human loss, particularly thinking about OnlyFans and the massive expansion of that in the last few years since COVID. Let me just work out how this clicker works. And I suppose I became interested in this because, as the kind introduction just then, I do lots of work around sexual abuse and supporting healing from it, but also trying to go upstream of the problem and looking at the different forces and factors in our culture and society that can be conducive to abuse, and trying to kind of prevent it through tackling some of those and being part of that collective effort. And so that basically kind of led me to look at what was happening with the online sex industry, really. And I've done a lot of work looking at the free porn platforms and what's going on there and the impact that they're having. And so through all of that came to start to think about OnlyFans, particularly when I was kind of exposed to some of their PR. I'm looking at Chris here because we were both at the same conference. That made me just ask some questions. And then that's taken me on a bit of a journey. So I want to kind of share that with you. And really kind of look behind the PR and think about some of the abuse and exploitation that is going on as a result, some of the hidden dynamics and harms of selling sex, the impact on children and young people, and the kind of overall general impact, what happens in our society when people are kind of taught to sexually objectify others and to have a sense of sexual entitlement about other people. Just a few things. There's, you know, as we know in this space, but if we think about the sex industry and selling sex, there's a lot of debate about language. I was just talking to Duncan about this before, and I'm probably going to piss everyone off by using a variety of terms. I was saying, I'm going to try not to offend anybody. He said, no, claim it, you are going to offend everybody. Right, I'm going to lean into Duncan's approach. Because there's been a big debate between, say, do we say prostitution, do we say sex work, for example. There's pros and cons to all of these different terms. If I use the term prostitution, I'm not trying to stigmatise anybody with that. If I use the term sex work, I'm not just saying it's the same as any other type of work. These are being criticisms levied at both terms. How I'm going to use it is I'm going to use prostitution if talking about when somebody is in person with someone else, selling sex, and I'm going to use sex work as a more kind of umbrella term, including webcamming. But again, I'm not trying to offend anybody, and I'm very open to debates around language and trying to get it right, and I'm on a learning journey. So let's just think about this online ecosystem that I'm talking about, which I would argue is both everywhere and nowhere. Now, what I mean by that is that we don't see what's behind other people's screens. You know, if something's on big billboards as we're driving down the road, we know what other people are being exposed to. But in the current world that we live in, we don't know. We can be completely blind to many other people's daily lives and what they are being bombarded with throughout that day via social media, via their devices. And you know, another focus of my work is on online misogyny, and say, for example, what teenage boys are being exposed to in terms of negative messages about girls and women. And many of us just won't be aware that that's happening. So it's trying to kind of find out what's going on in other people's worlds. But this is an ecosystem that is also everywhere, and millions and millions of people are caught up in it. So just to talk about OnlyFans, for those of you that don't know, this is a subscription-based website, the majority of which is people who are called creators, and again, lots of inverted commas here, but who are selling sexual services, sexual performances, images, videos, personalised content to their subscribers, to people who are paying them, you know, to subscribe for a month, or they may be paying for a particular video, and they'll often be chatting with the person who they are buying these sexual services from. And we don't have the exact numbers, but the majority of OnlyFans is that, and the majority of creators are women, generally young women, and the majority of subscribers and buyers are men. And OnlyFans takes a 20% cut from that. Absolutely massive usage. This is what I mean by it kind of being everywhere. In 1 month this year, 455 million visits in the US, 33 million in the UK. It's got 305 million users, but it's going up the whole time. 500,000 new subscribers every day. So this company is just ballooning. Incredible. It's been badged, a huge UK, because it's a UK company, UK online success story. It's really entwined with other parts of this ecosystem. So social media and the free porn platforms, because you can't advertise on the site itself. So for creators who are selling sexual services, they will need to be using social media. Instagram in particular is used, but also X, TikTok, as well as the free porn platforms where they're posting content to advertise. So this has led to, there's been a lot of sexual content on social media for a long time, but I would argue that this has led to social media becoming more inundated with sexualized content. And then behind the scenes, you've got management agencies and you've got chatters. And I could talk about this subject for a whole day, so I'm talking a bit fast and squeezing a lot in, and I won't be able to go into chatters in a lot of detail, but there are some really important investigations done by Reuters, the news agency, which I've referenced on the last slide, and you'll have these slides, that does a deep dive into the chatters. Some very successful creators don't have time to chat with all of the people buying sexual services from them, so that's outsourced to chatters. These are often people in lower income countries who are having to engage in this sexual chat, pretending to be the sex worker. So that's a whole nother thing, and I would say that there's quite a lot of harm attached to that in lots of different directions. And you've got these management agencies, and we'll talk a bit more about those, but those are agencies that will often go out hunting to find particularly young women who they think will do well on OnlyFans, and then kind of get them on board and then do a lot of their PR, their social media marketing, etc. So business is booming. Oh, and by the way, this is also kind of coming into other parts of life. I've just got this, you're seeing OnlyFans kind of being talked about in this, it's fun and mischievous and, but it's kind of exposing children and young people as well as others to sex work. So, for example, this is two women who are on OnlyFans holding up signs at the Euros. The kind of offending words have been blocked out, but they are, saying very sexual things on those billboards. And again, it's on those boards to try and generate business. So it's kind of stretching out into these other kind of parts of society. Business is booming. Users spent 6.6 billion on OnlyFans last year. Even though actually the average person who's creating on OnlyFans, who's selling sexual services, is earning a tiny amount, between $150 and $180 a month. These are figures that have just been released, OnlyFans annual report. The owner, Leonid Radvinsky, who's a British-Ukrainian 42-year-old, has made 1.3 billion from the site since 2020. Now, we struggle to kind of work out billions from millions. I don't know if you're the same as me, but even a million is hard to kind of get our heads around. What does that mean? So I found a way of translating this. If you were to count 1 million seconds, that would take you about 11 and a half days. If you're counting 1 billion seconds, that will take you 35 years. So I'm just trying to kind of get across, we are talking huge amounts of money, and this man is paying himself 1.3 million a day. So it's just showing you that this is making a lot. And how much of that money is dirty money? How much of that is built on abuse and exploitation and harm? And I'm arguing a lot. But before we get there, I'm going against the narrative in this talk, because OnlyFans has very much been narrated as fun, lucrative for people using it, ethical, empowering and safe. And that's been a huge part of its success, that it's saying this is the kind of fun and ethical and safe way of doing sex work. And it says, there's no difference between sex and anything else. Keely Blair, the CEO, cites that they're for adults, should cater to all of grown-ups' interests. Lots of people who are over 18 like sex. They also like comedy, sports, music. So let's just cater to our audience base and be able to provide opportunities for creators. We don't categorise people, so we don't. So it's kind of just, you can do anything on OnlyFans. You can do comedy, music, sex. It's just all the same fun thing, and it's just, let's just all respect each other and it's all fine. And I forgot to say some of my caveats, so I'm just going to come in now, which is that I have got quite a few quotes. I've just got so many voices that I want to highlight, and I may not have time to go through all of them, but you will have the slides. But also I will read aloud quotes, so don't try and read whilst I'm talking, because apparently then you don't get either one of them. That's what I heard. But I will read aloud quotes as I go. And the other thing to say is, obviously we are talking about difficult stuff, and I know that that's a theme throughout this conference, but just look after yourselves, and if there are things that I'm talking about that are hard, obviously, please just do what you need to do. But I am talking about abuse at points through this. So OnlyFans argues that it's the subscription social media platform that facilitates authentic connections between creators and their fans. And I would argue that authentic is exactly the opposite of what this is. It states that it age verifies its users, that it moderates all content, and that it allows content only from verified creators. So it's badging itself as we do things the safe way. That's why you can trust us, that's why you can use us. And this has been accepted societally, and it's definitely been accepted within the child protection space, in which I do a lot of work. And in this space, they've been given a platform, they've been given a seat at the table, they've been given trust, and they've been given silence. But let's look under the bonnet. Are things as good as they are made out to be? Let's start with the abuse, coercive control and exploitation that the site has facilitated. The online sex industry is highly conducive to abuse, and it draws to it many individuals who are seeking to profit through exploitation. What more obvious a place to start with than Andrew Tate, who really spearheaded the use of OnlyFans. And when I talk about OnlyFans, I'm not just talking about OnlyFans, I'm talking about, this is a big space. There are other webcamming platforms, and I'm not particularly singling them out, although they are the biggest and they've done the most to normalise this, and that is a particular issue. So it has drawn people to it, like Andrew and Tristan Tate, who are currently charged with human trafficking using OnlyFans relating to 7 victims, further allegations being investigated involving 35 other victims, including a 17 and a 15-year-old. So here's how Andrew Tate has self-described what he's done. My job was to meet a girl, get her to fall in love with me, to where she'd do anything I'd say, and then get her on webcam so we could become rich together. Now, you don't need me to tell you that there was no together involved in any of this. Ibiza Asset, by that he means a woman, has agreed to do OnlyFans. Since she moved to Bucharest, she's been fed, but nothing else. She's broke, and she can't go home, and she can't leave the house. Man, I sound almost evil, but I'm not. I'm a shepherd leading the sheep. Because this trafficking and abuse comes from a place of very deep misogyny. Not only does he appear to have done this, because you can be done for libel if you say he is guilty before conviction, but he also has taught other people to do it, other men to do this. I'd highly recommend the BBC documentary that really goes into the detail of this. But the War Room, this social network and Telegram channel through which Tate taught other members, and Tate's not even the most senior person in this network, so a cabal of them were teaching members how to groom and manipulate and coerce girls and women. So just to give you an example of some of the things that they're saying from leaked messages. We deliberately reduce attention and note if she chases. Then we set up a coffee date and execute a move to find out if she is willing to pay for our coffee and serve us. After that, it becomes a series of gradual steps to remove her entire support structure from her life. Then we punish her for a transgression, real or imagined, by having her get our name tattooed on her, leaving her family's home, apartment, town, country, webcamming, stripping, walking the track, getting us girls, escalate, escalate, escalate. She doesn't even have a wallet. Why do I need one, Daddy? I can't count it anyway. Isolate her from her friends, family, past. It's the kindest thing you can do for her if you are taking responsibility for having sole authority over her. Pavlovian conditioning, this is how you train dogs. So a very, Machiavellian, meticulously worked out system of growing the coercion and abuse of girls and women and using webcamming in that process. And we can't estimate how many people have been abused as a result of what the Tates and their like have done, and how they've trained. They have literally, in a way, got a manual for abuse here. And you can see how this is very reminiscent of many other forms of sexual abuse and domestic abuse. And there are other forms of abuse that we know are taking place on OnlyFans as well. So here we're really talking about kind of what's termed trafficking, when you're coercing somebody into what would be called sex work, into prostitution. But we're also coming across a lot of evidence of image-based abuse, where images are non-consensually shared for profit. So this is often a scenario where two people have been going out, they have taken films within that relationship, consensually, sometimes non-consensually, and then at a later date, and again there is a gender dynamic here, the woman may discover that the ex-boyfriend has set up an OnlyFans account because this is a way of making money. And so what used to be called revenge porn, which is a problematic term in a variety of ways, but it's problematic now because revenge, not only the porn bit, but the revenge bit, we've now got a different primary motive, which is profit. So previously these images were shared often for revenge motives. Profit, I would say, is taking over, that men are realising this is a way of making money. I turned around and saw he was taking a video. I asked him, what was he doing? And I got really scared. He began to say, yeah, but you can make money from this, which it turns out he had done. It was awful. We've also got the use of OnlyFans in coercive control situations where, again, a gender dynamic, a male abuser is forcing his partner into porn production on OnlyFans. He said, we'll create an account on OnlyFans and you'll make material there. It looked as if the account belonged to me. The men probably had no idea that it was him controlling the account. This woman also described how journalists had interviewed her about the positives of OnlyFans, and they had no idea that next to her was her husband dictating everything that she had to say. So a lot of this is very hidden. There are also a number of cases where we've got people who have sexually assaulted or raped somebody, and they've taken footage of that and then they've uploaded it to OnlyFans, and again for the profit motive. I particularly recommend the Reuters investigations for more details of all of these abuses. Child sexual abuse, this may be where a adolescent has taken over, has got hold of someone else's OnlyFans account, but it may also be where an OnlyFans creator is having sex with a child, is raping but that may feel, say it's an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and the 16-year-old thinks that this is just consensual, but it's being filmed and it's being uploaded onto OnlyFans. And you've also got situations where people have been trading child sexual abuse images, and that's then gone undetected on OnlyFans, even though they say that they moderate everything. So how has OnlyFans reacted to all of this evidence of abuse? I would argue inaction, minimisation and gaslighting. They're making huge claims. For example, the huge claim that they moderate all of their content. Well, if they're moderating all of their content, why are these things not coming down straight away? Often these victims are sending in evidence of the abuse and it's not taken down for over a year. And if they are seeing everything, why haven't they spotted it before somebody's reporting it? Are they tolerating this abuse? And they've profited handsomely from all of this, but where are the difficult conversations about that money and this actually being dirty money, and what are they going to do about that? But I also want to talk about OnlyFans where it's not necessarily clear abuse in the ways that I've just described. I want to talk about that wider set of that there's other situations in which, say, an individual is selling sexual services on OnlyFans, and they're not necessarily being coerced or trafficked directly by anybody else. Because, and I want to really make clear here that I'm not going to be arguing that everybody who sells sex is harmed by that. What I am saying is that the risks of harm are high, and that many people are harmed by it, and that we haven't been very good at seeing that harm and hearing it. And that if we look at the accounts of many people who have sold sex, including webcamming, dissociation is often really central to that experience, as is the erosion of boundaries, and it generally involves a suppression of their sexual autonomy. So being in a sexual situation, behaving in a sexual way, being paid to suppress what you actually desire or want, and what harm can that exert for many people. And so I just want to speak to some of this here. And I'm drawing on a piece of research which has interviewed people who were involved with OnlyFans, with webcamming on OnlyFans and other similar sites. Everything happened on their terms, so it was incredibly degrading for me. I wasn't in a position where I could control what I did because I was desperate, and I was in desperate need of money for the drugs. You should always assume she's not there by choice. It's the same when buying someone in person. Anyone can pretend, and eventually it just became a normal thing. The toughest part is having to talk to them, and if you haven't posted anything in a week, they're like, I'm going to cancel my subscription. And people are always on your case, why aren't you replying? And they want to meet up, and you have to keep up with the fantasy they have. So you can't just say, no, I never want to meet you, I hate you. Instead, you have to play the role. And this comes up a lot in people's accounts, having to play this role, particularly through the chat function, having to pretend, having to suppress your real self and be this sexual fantasy for somebody else, and the impact that can have over time. Sometimes what I found almost the hardest were the times when they wanted it to be like a relationship. I feel like that's almost worse than when they're violent, because it gets intimate in a really forced way. I think maybe she's speaking there to, often people talk about having two selves in this work, and having to create this kind of sexual performative self, and the demand for her to be intimate, kind of breaking through that boundary to try and get to her real self. I wouldn't have taken those pics if it weren't for OnlyFans. There were times when I got a request for something I didn't really want to do, but they offered a lot of money, so I thought, okay, I'll just film the video that I don't actually want to do, send it. Then if someone asks for it again, I already have the video. If I could build up a library of stuff I didn't want to do, then at least I wouldn't have to suffer. So he's finding a way there, like, well, I'll just do it the once and then I've got a video. So, really trying to kind of force himself. But this didn't really help. The more requests came in for things I didn't want to do, it was hard to say no. I dissociated a lot. I just shut down. I was there, but not really. I think that's why I don't remember much, because I just turned off. That's also why I don't feel connected to my own body today, and why I have these episodes. And this is not uncommon in people in the years following having been involved in different forms of sex work, this difficult kind of journey back to themselves after the kind of chronic dissociation. Again, I'm not saying this is true of everybody, but I am saying that this is a common experience for many people that isn't often talked about. Many people might feel that webcamming is a bit more distance than, say, that kind of in-person sex work or prostitution, but there can be different challenges involved, including the impact of the images. The material doesn't go away, and there's this constant anxiety of wondering who has seen it, and when you might get outed and so on. It's a really brutal kind of anxiety to carry around. I feel it doesn't matter, like I've already lost a part of myself. What the hell? What difference does it make? But even if you don't think about it in the moment, the consequence of being filmed, it's like adding a weight to the heavy backpack you're already carrying. It becomes an extra burden because it might never disappear and you don't know what will happen with it. There's a big difference between things happening behind closed doors and things being out there for everyone to see. Knowing that the things that happen to me are somehow forever is really tough. It's so a part of me will never escape. Because anybody can obviously film what they're seeing on OnlyFans and post that elsewhere. And we know that for many... So what are the kind of routes into this? And obviously it's very different for different people. But we know that there are often constraints. There are often constraints and influences at play. Including, I would argue with this, a kind of ideology around sexual freedom that I'm going to mention briefly. How much longer do I have?
5 minutes.
Okay. Am I still getting my 40 minutes? Or is this is this Duncan's fault?
10 minutes and we will make it work.
Thank you. Yes. Well, so yes, and I would argue that in the current climate there has been pressure and persuasion, particularly of young women, and deception involved with that. And I just want to talk a little bit about that because I feel like this is a particular problem that we need to address. I've got a long quote here, but I am going to read it because I think it is such a window into what is going on, the experience of many young women who are being drawn into this world. And this is a woman who worked for one of the management agencies that I mentioned. Okay, so it's a real window into how that operates. I spent a considerable amount of time in contact with girls on TikTok and Instagram, encouraging them to do OnlyFans to try to get them to join our agency. For girls who didn't meet our minimum earnings, we would give them tips on how to grow their OnlyFans account so they could join us. They would then make it their life mission to grow their OnlyFans so they could be a part of our agency. We let them think they were privileged to come on board with us. We let them think we cared for them. The girls would say that the agency saved their lives. Some were lonely, shy, socially isolated. Many came from broken homes. Any boundaries they may have had when starting out were soon broken down. There was too much competition for them to say no. Age play was huge. And by the way, age play means pretending that you're a child. We've now got AI involved in that, where people are sometimes aging themselves into children. And this is happening on OnlyFans and other platforms. The girls who looked the youngest were the most in demand and made the most money, so you'd promote them that way. As time went on, I struggled to even be able to open a photo or video without feeling sick. I would cry every day for these girls and think about the young babies in my family, and if they grew up to do this, how heartbroken I would be. We don't call this abuse, but it certainly feels like it to me. And these forces are often interacting with, this kind of pressure and persuasion and deception. The deception that this is just fun and it's just a very easy, quick way of making money with no harm attached. This is often interacting with pre-existing vulnerabilities and kind of the psychology of re-victimization that can draw people into this. I won't read all of these quotes, but I just a couple here. I didn't choose prostitution, a mixture of the culture I lived in during the 90s, sex-positive feminism, and a longing to be loved by my biological papa who had abandoned my siblings' mother and me, chose it for me. Poverty chose it for me, anger chose it for me, wanting to be loved chose it for me. Reenacting trauma means putting yourself in similar situations or places to the original trauma, or finding similar people, and to create a new narrative in an attempt this time to be in control, to write a new ending, one in which you are in charge, not victimised. The sex trade is the perfect place for the sexually traumatised to try unconsciously to resolve former hurt, because an unending number of men want to use your body. And that's Mia Doring, who's written a memoir, who who had experienced prostitution and then went on to become a therapist. And again, I'm really not trying to say this is true of everybody, but these are common dynamics that are not getting the curious compassion that they merit. Instead, we've got a narrative of nothing to see here. Everything that I've just talked about, we've actually got pretty good in recent years. We weren't there to begin with, but we've got pretty good about thinking about some of this stuff when it comes to adolescent sexual exploitation. So if a teenager says, actually, this is something that I'm just enjoying doing, it's all fine, we don't just go, okay, it's consensual, fine. And yet when somebody steps over the line of their 18th birthday, it's like we no longer afford them this rich understanding of what it is to be human. And we no longer give them the valuing and curiosity that they deserve. All we can see is their choice. And we are separating those people where we can say choice from those where you've got this really direct coercion and trafficking going on, yet actually sometimes their experiences are not as different as we say. Again, I won't go through all the quotes, so much I want to say. But Rachel Moran, from her memoir Paid For, prostitution is a particularly cruel form of sexual abuse because though sexual abuse that manifests in other forms also hammers home the message there is no sexual abuse going on here, only in prostitution is this message still respected after the facts have been uncovered. The silencing voice of prostitution abuse speaks with great conviction, and much of the world believes it. And you know, you'll have these slides with the other quotes, but this is a common thing that people who have experienced great harm and abuse within it often feel that they cannot name that because they will just be told, well, you made a choice, it's consensual, it's fine. You know, as she then goes on to say, it doesn't matter, all of these different things we talked about, says the world, that prostitution was chosen for you through poverty and all the spin-off social disadvantages that come with that. You chose it, says the world. So if you want to blame yourself, if you want to blame someone, go blame yourself. Why have we been so blind to this? I don't have time to go into this in great amounts of detail, but I have done a couple of other talks that really look at these freedom ideologies that we are beholden to within Western culture. Free market, free internet, sexual freedom, free speech. Freedom is something that we really value. Now that's a good thing, but it's been narrated in a very narrow way. Rather than say freedom to live free from abuse, freedom to enjoy rich relationships, it really boils down to the freedom of the powerful and the freedom to do what I want and not give a sod about anybody else. And this is valued at all costs to the point where we're ignoring other values like respect, dignity, compassion, and we're ignoring what it means to be fully human. So just diving in on neoliberalism and free market capitalism, this has really taught us to think of society as one big market, and humans, we're just rational agents maximising self-interest. So if you're selling, you're buying, it's all neutral and it's actually all positive, and whenever you find a new chance to sell or buy, great, entrepreneurship, that's empowerment, yes, yes, yes. That model has hidden a much richer truth, which I've put in kind of grey here and white. It's kind of hidden, you know, that actually there's so much more going on. We are relational beings who depend on care and respect for one another. We have an inherent vulnerability, and sex is a unique site of vulnerability where we can be uniquely hurt and harmed. We feel pain and distress, and we're damaged when people disrespect us or devalue us. We have inalienable rights and responsibilities, and we have core values that should guide how we treat one another. So I'm just going to have to skip along a little bit here, but just to say that model of the world invites us to objectify other people. Huge research literature on this, which finds that when we sexually objectify or objectify in other ways, we see people as being less competent, less moral, less deserving of moral treatment, less warm, less sensitive to pain, and having less of a mind. Now you can take any one of those things and you can map that onto a greater risk of mistreatment and disregard. Just to highlight that children, I'm concerned about all of this. Children are being channeled and shaped into this sexual economic logic. So as I mentioned, social media, particularly Instagram and X, are bombarding teenagers with sexually objectifying content and unwanted sexual advantages. So, for example, within the past week, 19% of 13 to 15-year-olds have seen sexual nude images on Instagram that they don't want to see. 13% have received an unwanted sexual advance. Adult sex content begins appearing in new 13-year-old accounts in as little as 3 minutes. And a piece of research I was involved in earlier on this year, we found that a quarter of 11 to 14-year-old boys saw sexual content within 10 minutes of going on social media. So there's this big bombard which is shaping children to approach sex as a transaction, as a commodity, and to sexually objectify others in the process. This leads to a pervasive set of harms. I just find this really heartbreaking, if I really drop down and connect with all of this, that relationships, particularly between boys and girls, are being kind of placed out of reach. I mean, this is a 15-year-old survivor who I spoke to in some research interviews last year, and this was her experience of being at school, talking about boys in her year. They're seeing women as not people. You can't even say this stuff to them because they're not that mature yet. They won't understand. They'll just laugh at you. You can't be like, oh, I'm not an object, I'm literally a human being. They don't see you. They don't see you as one. I think that's the same with a lot of boys, even boys that haven't done bad things. Just all of the boys that I know in my school. So for her, what does she see when she looks ahead and she thinks about relationships in her life? And I personally think that relationships between men and women are just such a rich part of life and of humanity, and this is the potential for that is really being undermined here. So in summary, we have a massive sex industry complex that's operating largely out of sight of those that aren't in its grasp. And this industry is making a land grab for the most intimate parts of ourselves, colonising them for capitalist gain. It's been aided and abetted by dominant cultural narratives around freedom, and this is fueling numerous harms, including abuse and exploitation, objectification, dissociation and distress. So where do we go from here? I'm not going to go through this whole list, and this is only a few things. I think we should think about our regulation of the sex industry. I was just saying to Duncan earlier, I don't have all the answers, or I'm not particularly wedded to a particular approach, but what I would like to see is these conversations starting to happen, and those conversations coming from a clear-sighted understanding of this reality, rather than it just being dressed up as all just fun and mischief and nothing to see here. Let's start from this reality and then go from there. There's some further reading and listening ideas there, and very interested to continue the conversation today and tomorrow, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I'm sure, like me, you've probably got lots of questions, and we're really conscious of time. We've got lots of space in the coffee, if that's okay. You can grab Duncan or Ellie, or maybe Ellie, because Duncan stole Ellie's time, and so and later on. We also are just thinking of having a bit of a change to this afternoon's agenda, because you're meant to go to coffee now and then go off to your workshops and then come back here. If you can bear with me for 3 minutes now while I just go through some bits, we won't need to come back after the workshop, and that should give us a few more minutes before going on to chosen wellbeing activities if you wish to. First things to say, and particularly speaking as a mum of 2 young children, that was a very heavy talk as well, so we have got people in the quiet room. Please do look after yourself and take some time as you need. This afternoon you have seen on your agenda there is a sound bath, and that is upstairs in Duncan 2, thank you very much. When you go in there, you'll see 2 cameras on tripods. I promise you they're not on, they're not filming, it's just for tomorrow, so don't be put off by that as well. We also have a walk for anyone, you don't need to book. Okay, no, maybe you do. I'm looking at Chris. Chris has 20 headsets, and she's going to do the silent sounds walk thing.
Silent disco headset.
Sorry, silent disco headset walk. Got it. So, yeah, absolutely. So that will be at both of these things will start at 5:05. So workshop deliverers, if you want to give people 10 minutes to go for a wee and before they need to do all those things. The other thing to say as well is where Vicky is standing, Buddy's there. He's only got 4 messages on him. He's really sad. Give him a message. Tell him how you're feeling. Tell him how you're doing. And Chris S, wherever she is, has told me to remind you about the game. And I'm so sorry. I've been completely oblivious to this. Is that enough of a? Oh, the answer's to help you out. The reason it's worth doing this game is there's vouchers and you can actually win stuff. So it's beyond networking, although if the answers are being given, I'm going to leave that all to you. I've been asked to say it. That's where we're going with that. Because we're not going to come back after our workshops, some of you are only here for today. Please, please, please give us feedback. We've got QR codes. We'll be emailing them to you. They'll be on display on here soon when I've emailed them to Jessie, which I haven't done yet. Please, please give your feedback if you are leaving us today. And I think that's everything for the moment. Is there anything else? Yeah, no. So I think that's everything else for our YouTube people. So YouTubers, thank you very much for joining us. We will see you tomorrow morning at 9:50. No, this is so organised. At 9 o'clock, where we will be opening again and then going straight into our keynote speeches. So thank you very much, YouTubers. See you later.